Today is the last one, and the topic is the death and birth of leaderlessness, a conversation by director at Zilberman'ın and art critic Evrim Altuğ and author and psychologist Gündüz Vassaf. Thank you everyone for joining. You can also write your questions or comments on chat, and also we can turn on your microphones. Shall we start?
Evrim, please take the lead. Not as a leader, but just take the lead.
Okay, I'm trying to do it. All right. Like every moment, also this moment is a unique one. And thank you for all efforts of all participations to honor us because of giving their time and existence to this event. And I would like to especially thank to Mr. Gündüz Vassaf to accepting this project and participating on it. Welcome, Mr. Vassaf. I hope you can hear.
I just heard you, Evrim. It comes and it goes. I hear you now.
Okay. So based on this technological limit, we would like to talk very slowly and patiently. Sorry for that. But I would like to start to announce something to all participants of this event. We would like to do this conversation not just between us, not just between Mr. Vassaf and me, but we would like to announce you that please join us. Please send your questions, thoughts, and sentences very, very emotionally or, very randomly, whatever you need, whatever you choose, because of the spirit or the identity of this project by Mr. Isaac Chong Wai. This project is questioning and criticizing the position of being a leader in the name of leaderlessness. So please join us with your questions, with your thoughts, and this is a very official announcement. So in a very unofficial spirit. And after these words, I would like to talk with the freedom of choice. The freedom of choice, Mr. Vassaf. Do you think that is this our only chance to live in this life, in this planet, in this universe? Please join us.
I'm not sure if I heard you clearly, but first of all, I would like to, in the spirit of the topic of this meeting and continuing from your thanks, I would like to extend not thanks, but no thanks to all the governments on our planet at the moment. All the governments, no thanks to them, because had it not been for
I think again we have something in problem technically because of the internet connection, I think. Well, let's continue our talk while we're waiting Mr. Vassaf again to join our conversation. in this event, in this project, Mr. Isaac Chong Wai tried to share the advantage of creation.
Yes.
So, can you hear us, Mr. Vassaf, and can you talk?
Yes. Perfectly. Should I continue?
Okay. Please join us. Okay.
Okay. I was just trying to say, thank you. I was just trying to say that in the spirit of the topic of this, I would like not to thank every government in the world on our planet, had they considered at least reducing their military budgets by 1 or 2% for the duration of the COVID crises, there would have been enough funds available to feed everyone on the planet without them having to work. With that out of the way, let us continue with leaderless, because what is now happening is a result of defunct, bankrupt leadership by every country in the world. Not only that they were unprepared, but during this crisis, they could have made funds available that they have not. So now we can continue with that aside.
All right. Because of your words, also remind that your previous book, you compared Russia with USA several years ago.
Yes.
So can you remember that project on the basis of COVID and epidemic geographical situation of globe again? What can you say us when you spelled your goal to write that book?
I think even my comparison of the then Soviet Union and the US was in terms of freedom. And I was trying to make the point that coming from two opposite directions, they achieved the same result in terms of censorship. The Soviet one is obvious. The party, the Politburo, especially in literature, for instance, censor things. But then in the US, you had market censorship. By the time your book ended up on the editor's desk, it was already, to a degree, if you wanted your book to sell, you already self-censored yourself. And then the editor and then the marketing director of the publishing house, with their suggestions, make the book more digestible to the buyer. So on the one hand, you have the party abrogating freedom of speech. On the other hand, you have the marketplace. So in that respect, I thought that the two societies, although at opposite ends, were similar.
Your words remind me an image of everyone is under a shower of existence with hot and cold water.
And who controls the taps in your example? Who controls the tap for hot water and who controls it for cold water? And also who decides what is hot and what is cold?
That's
my question to you.
Yes, I think this freedom of choice belongs to our feeling of dirtiness, I think.
Right. Evrim, this hot and cold example, there's an anecdote of two persons traveling in a train in the same compartment. And one says to the other, it's a bit cold here. Do you mind if I turn up the heat a bit? And the other gentleman says, of course, please do. He turns turns the knob. After a few minutes, the other gentleman says, it's really a bit too hot here. Do you mind if we turn it back down? So up and down, they argue with each other, and finally they decide to call the conductor so that he can regulate the heat as to what the official temperature on the train should be. They call the conductor, they ask him to regulate the heat, and the conductor is surprised. He says, what do you mean regulate the heat? This knob hasn't been working for a month.
I see. So on that terms, Mr. Vassaf, what can we do in the limits of creation on this age of our crisis, on this age of our problematic agendas, and over speed of communication, so-called communication?
I think probably, Evrim, please call me Gündüz. I call you Evrim. We've known each other for years. So I feel a distance to my name. I feel alienated from Mr. Vassaf. But I think really the path to creativity is by not paying attention to others. And when we are paying attention to others, the first thing we have to do, the people we like to listen to, first of all, we have to question how they know what they know or what they profess to know. We take role models, leaders, intellectual figures too much for granted, especially ones that we like, that we have a sympathy for, an affinity for. And that affinity, that sympathy breaks down all critical thinking. It breaks down also creativity. So in that respect, creativity is really very much a singular affair. In the way that some people profess that God created the world by himself, no matter what the religion is, as a creator, and he took no advice from anybody, he or she, but usually it's a he, almost always a he, sometimes a turtle or something else, but same for us, that we cannot have role models as creators. Otherwise, we keep on repeating. We can pay attention to tradition, we can pay attention to other dances, other music, but we have to make our own music.
So do we have the right to mix all the colors, to change the current situation in the name of our existence, in the name of our personal authoritarian position of creating ourselves? Is it ethical? Is it legal? Or what do you think about it? Because in the time in our existences, in our faiths, suddenly or timingly or coincidentally, we became like a collector of ourselves. We collecting our role models, as you say. We collecting our sympathetic musical backgrounds, or memories of color, or smell, smells, or anything. We behave like a curator of a museum of ourselves. So is it normal, or is it problematic to collect ourselves from the earth, from the world, or from universe itself? Is it right? Because we behave like we behave like a consumer in a supermarket.
Mm-hmm. 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 That's a very difficult question to, even a difficult topic to debate, because in one sense, let's say in the Jungian sense, not that I'm a fan of Jung, but we are a collection. Each individual is a collection of the past, or what he calls the archetypes. But what I think he doesn't see, or what we don't see when we think of being a collection of everything, is that we, you and I, everyone at the moment listening to us, with us, and we with them, even with their silence, and so far not having made a comment, we're forever in a flux, always changing every second, so that we can only be a part of that second, what we're in at that second, because I'm changing as I talk with you now, as I listen to myself talking with you, as I look at your reaction to my talking to you, and as I listen to your questions. But often we're not aware of the fact that we are in a state of constant change, because we like fixed things. We like to know who we are. And we've been asking that question since at least Socrates, know thyself. And that's an impossible question to answer, because the thyself is forever changing. The second we think of it as something concrete, then we have totalitarianism. Then we have something that's too clearly defined. Then any definition on its own is artificial, especially given the recent development, not recent, but early 20th century developments in physics, like Heisenberg's uncertainty principle.
And also when we mirroring your words, your thoughts into the art history, we immediately remember the movements of art and the manifests of art. Some people in the past always try to reinvent or re-realize the world, the being of our presence in the name of their dreams, on based of their vision, etc. And they immediately, they started to write personally or collectively, they started to write manifests. And when they do that, you can always see it. When they do that, they are using the term we. Yes. Is it honest to you? Is it honest to you? I mean, so it's not totalitarian.
That's a good one. I mean, the word I is probably just as totalitarian as we. And I'm certainly no linguist, but I'm quite sure that there are languages in which the word I does not exist. Or perhaps the word we does not exist. Or even if they do, they exist in a different sense than the way we understand I and you. But what I fear these days, especially with the domination of American as a language, because to study, to read papers, science, art, whatever, entering universities, traveling, English has really become our dominant language. And not English, American, which brings in tow an American way, whatever an American way of thinking is, quote unquote, onto our outlook, onto our relationships with each other, onto how we perceive the environment, how we perceive money, how we perceive politics, etc. Whereas different languages have different ways of people looking at each other and at themselves. That's why there are different vocabularies. And unfortunately, I mean, I really look at American in a Darwinian sense, in the same sense that the Amazon forest is disappearing, which makes the planet less successful, in fact, on its way toward death. The more we have one language, the more we use our subtlety and flexibility to deal with each other, with culture, and with whatever we want to or hope to plan for the future. So I don't know how to avoid the domination of American, but we really have to be careful in how we perceive the language, how we use it, and especially by, if we're not native-born Americans, by not losing our languages. There are many, the fact that there's a great deal of intermarriage in the world at the moment, that you have a Peruvian marrying somebody from Nigeria and they live in Sweden, let's say, but when they don't speak Peruvian or Nigerian with each other and adopt yet a third language, and usually English, that's a great loss to the planet, not just in terms of culture, but in terms of survival. So English, or American rather, we're talking about leaderlessness. American in and of itself is also a form of a leader.
Because it creates an metaphysical uniform.
Quite. And with this comment, I certainly am not praising the Académie Française, which strips to a very strict definition of religion, saying this is our religion and it can't change and we don't want these words. I'm not saying that at all.
Your words on Académie Française also reminds me the sentence of late French postmodern philosopher Jean Baudrillard. Once he said that when the whole earth becomes Western, where does or where can the sun will rise?
That's a good one. My answer to that is, why do we call Japan the Far East and not England the Far West?
So
we're dominated. In that
sense,
yeah, go ahead, sorry.
Please go on, Gündüz.
No, go ahead. No, please go ahead.
Okay.
And could we have some comments or interdictions or criticism to those listening to us?
Yeah.
From those listening to us, could we?
Do we have some comments or questions? Because I'm just only seeing my image and Mr. Vassaf.
No, we don't have for now.
Okay, so we can go on.
Okay, then if we don't have more participation, then with apologies to all those listening, because the more Evrim and I speak to each other, the more there's a chance of stepping on each other's toes during this dance. So we'd love to dance with all of you. Hopefully you too with us.
When we are trying to talk and analyze the problematic of unification of language in the name of criticism of globalization, immediately I also remember an attempt and cultural heritage, which reminds the vision or the mission or the dreams of United Nations. I'm sure you know, Mr. Gündüz, I'm sure you know the phenomenon of Esperanto.
Yes.
Can we talk about it?
Yeah, I mean, I never wanted to learn it or tried to learn it. I don't know if you have.
No, me
Though
too.
I was very happy. When some friends of mine who belong to an Esperanto society in Turkey wanted to translate a few of Nazım Hikmet's poems into Esperanto. I like the effort very much. I appreciate it. Yeah.
So is it translate or trans early?
I don't know if one can even have a translation, but I mean, the problem with Esperanto is that, again, it's a very fixed language. Its rules, regulations are really frozen in time because it's not a language that we use in everyday speech. In interaction with each other, it's not a changing language. It stays in one place, in a fixed place. And I really don't think there's another language created in Turkey called Balay Belen. Amazing effort. I don't know if you've heard of it. There's a Balay Belen dictionary. You can buy it at some Turkish bookstores. But it doesn't go anywhere.
With your conversation on the newspaper that produced and created by Mr. Isaac Chong Wai, you had a conversation, and on that session, you underlined that. I hope you can hear me because I lose your image. Can I continue? Because I lose Mr. Vassaf. Oh, okay, I can hear you now.
Hello, hello.
Okay, I can hear you. Can you hear me, Mr. Vassaf?
I'm back, Evrim.
Okay, I can hear you.
Hello. Hello.
I can hear you. Hello.
Okay.
Can we go on?
Please.
All right. With your conversation with artist Isaac Chong Wai, you underlined how to listen between each other. What is listening? What is what kind of action is it? Because I'm trying to open that topic because we are in an age of over-information, over-communication. How can we find an acoustic or existential space to understand and realize each other in an equal base?
By being less connected, I think, Evrim. I think that's the simple answer. I mean, anyone who goes to the movies, looks at the social media, looks at. Can you hear me?
Yes, but your words also.
Hello?
Yes, can you hear me?
It looks at, yeah. Yes,
Please.
Go ahead.
But your thoughts also brings the danger of alienation between each other.
No, let me try to expand on my example. I mean, just by watching television, a person, just by watching television a few hours a day, and there are millions of people who watch more than a few hours a day, the number of romances, the number of marriages, the number of divorces, the number of arguments, the number of deaths, the number of gangsters, bank robberies, etc., that they're subject to just in one day, is more than our species as a collective experienced until the advent of such media. A love affair 10,000 years ago, a love affair, a death on the planet in a simple town or village was a lifetime experience, once in a lifetime experience. A murder, etc., that would be talked about for years, would become legends or epics, whatever. Now we're so much engulfed with such information that it desensitizes us, not only intellectually, but emotionally. And that's why when you see a homeless man on the street in New York dying, you walk by him. That's something that would have been impossible in the history, in the 90%, let's say.
Late words of viewers I can't hear, but I think we can go on now. And also in the project also in the project of Isaac, we witnessed to the mortality of being an immortal one. I mean, in almost every artwork, there's a limit of understanding, there's a limit of taking a part on the history, there's a limit of being understanding totally by audience, by imaginary existence. So almost any artwork in the history of the world are being created in the name of being remembered as an immortal trace to the universe. How can we do it in these times? Is it is it normal to be trying to be immortal in these very mortal circumstances based on epidemic, based on COVID? Because it makes no sense to me. Because there's a term now since almost 40 or 50 years called contemporary art. You know, it's a daily one. It's a very mortal one.
Yeah.
Please.
Yeah, Evrim, that's, I mean, if I had a friend, I still do have that friend, a poet. His name is Reşit Ergener. And in he ends one of his poems with a question: when will there no longer be poets? And the answer is when everyone is a poet. I mean, the more people, individuals, or in collectives express themselves in art, I think wonderful for our planet, wonderful for our species. And let me just add to that, that there's a biologist at Harvard, E.O. Wilson. He was giving his retirement farewell speech, and he said, if they came from outer space to our planet, what do you think they would be interested in? And he answered the question himself: our art. Certainly not our leaders, certainly not the history, the wars, the battles, the economies, the bankruptcies, but our art. The more art there is, of course, the more it's entertainment, it's a search for the soul, it's a search for meaning, everything collected together. But I fear that in the last 50, 60 years, artists have become very selfish. That, as you say,
I think we lose Mr. Vassaf again technically, but I hope he can come back again. So, Mr. Gündüz, can I hear you, or Mr. Gündüz? Can I continue, Zeynep?
I think he come back now.
Okay.
And also we have a comment and a question, I think, from Eser Ep Özdemir. We can also turn on your microphone. Okay.
I'm back. Evrim?
Okay, Mr. Vassaf, yes. Please, and we have a comment
I'm
also.
back.
Thank you. I was actually,
Hello.
I wrote it to the text, the chat part, but I would like to read what I written. As far as I can remember, Gündüz Bey, you were mentioning in one of your articles that how it is almost nonsense to draw the line of the West and East from Istanbul. And I was in a wish to ask a question from another angle to leaderlessness that we have been talking about. I did listen also the conversation that yesterday was held by Tarabya Kültür Akademisi, and I have been actually having in this question in my mind that I would like to ask you, as we are in the era of data and information, and with the involvement of the companies like Cambridge Analytica and their impact on the Brexit and the USA elections, each individual is a data, as also we know, and we also face problems about our privacy. So how would you like to comment, or if you would like to comment on the social media and its, let's say, contribution to leaderlessness?
Evrim, would you like to take the question? Because I missed the first half, unfortunately.
With pleasure.
I can repeat it if you would like to.
Evrim, mikrofonun kapalı. Şimdi açabilirsin tekrar. Evet, duyabiliyoruz.
I think you can hear me.
Yes, Evrim, we can hear you.
So, based on the question that comes to our conversation, leaderless conversation, thank you so much. The words on taking the position as a data is a very huge, important topic of being awareness and taking the responsibility of creating ourselves as an organic or inorganic existence, as symbols, as codes, as emojis or iconographies, and with whole awareness of Orwellian spirit in a huge surveillance mode. We should always be aware of that we are not free, because technically that service is not free in the terms of finance, and also legally is not service, is not that service is free, because huge control of cyber terrorism or over counter state possibilities of freedom of thought, etc., in the name of press problems or conversation of or communication problems. So unfortunately, I think that, like in the Matrix movies, I think that, and I experienced that, we are always in a huge simulacrum of democracy and existence, which defended and consumed by huge companies and huge nations like Russia, like United States or United Kingdom. It became a huge market. I mean, the freedom of choice or thought. And that also brings a big problem of copyright, because as you can follow, there are too much copyright piracy on sharing or linking the intellectually properties like movies, music, or literature in online. There are too much cyber pirates, which they are trying to create an anarchy of information, which disrupts the rights of artists, I think, or editors, or whatever you choose in that hierarchy of creation, cultural industry, I mean. These are my words.
I'm back, by the way. I think we have a better connection now. Except that I don't hear you. You muted yourself.
Can you hear?
Yep, perfect.
Yes, please continue, Mr. Vassaf, with your contribution to the questions and thoughts of Mrs. Eser Epezdemir.
Okay, I missed a bit, but I think I overheard, or I came into the midst of a discussion about choice and the freedom of choice. If you'd like, I can try to pick up that thread. Yeah, of course, we're engulfed with choices, and all the choices are given to us by others. I think the freedom of choice is not to choose the choices that are being given to us. But unfortunately, especially as consumers, we're so conditioned to choosing among similar things. I mean, this toothpaste or that toothpaste. I mean, from a very early age, we're used to choosing consumer items, which are really very different, not much different from each other, sometimes the price. But once that choice, the act of choosing, becomes internalized, it's almost like a fix. We want to choose, we want to keep on choosing, rather than refusing to choose among similar things. We lose our ability to discriminate between things, between choices, because even what we're going to choose, the choices that are offered to us to choose, all have their own propagandists, which you mentioned, Evrim, be it companies, advertising people, ideologues, authorities, whatever. Each choice that they want us to make already comes with added baggage. And that added baggage we cannot even question because it becomes packaged as knowledge or pseudo knowledge, so that we've lost the ability really to distinguish between propaganda, sales talk, and just a free flow of discussion, of ideas, of choices. So the liberation, the liberator, then, I mean, what are we going to do about all this nightmarish situation? And the liberation is through us, by making less choices and by questioning each choice that we make. Even our love affairs have become matters of choices. I'll try this and then I'll try that. Well, I did this for a few months with that person. Let me try it with that person, etc. I mean, we're hurting our souls. We're damaging our souls. We're killing our emotions by looking at relationships also as choices that can change from one day or 1 month to the next, because we're treating our relationships now as consumer items as well, because we've been conditioned that way.
Yes, also under the prisonership condition of the time itself, we always has to be hurry to create or exist.
Exactly, exactly. Buy while the sales last. Buy in 2 weeks, otherwise the prices are going to go up. Buy now. Choose now. This is your last chance.
Of course. What about the problem of intimacy? Should we close ourselves to each other in the name of intimacy, or should we hug into each other in these urgent times of solidarity?
I think intimacy, we certainly need to be more intimate than ever. more intimate than ever in one-to-one relationships, small group relationships. That's the only way to protect ourselves from powers that want to influence us.
But in the social media, we try to be free, even we not behave or believe into it. We try to be free in our social media networks or collective groups in order to create our intimate, personal, social networks. But it is in self, it creates a very real and ethical conflict. We create our society. It's very meaningless.
I agree, Evrim. I mean, intimacy is not a 3-minute egg. Most of our relationships on the social media are almost against time. I mean, we even have things like Snapchat that disappear after, what, 60 seconds or 2 minutes or whatever. It's our social relationships are even built on destruction. Intimacy is not that. Intimacy is not connection. Intimacy is a relationship on many levels. It's not just a give and take.
And what about the position of taking the privilege of being selected or being select someone or somebody or sometime? Because how much you can escape, you try to escape, how much you inescapably being a you know, a priest, you know, being a slave of your freedom.
Well, I don't even know what we mean by freedom any longer. But in the spirit of Isaac's leaderless, I think it's the freedom from leaders, first of all. And it starts with our parents. That even as children, I think as children, as little children, I think we're really, the children are the last slaves of human society. And the parents are in a way the leaders because they tell their kids what's right, what's wrong, but more than that, they give their children names, they give their children religion, just like the slave owners did in plantations. They gave them Christianity and various sects of Christianity. So I think it begins at home, with the way parents look upon their children as if they own their children. I have children, I have a child, I have a car. The language is one of possession, whereas children really are, in a way, like an escrow account for the parents, only to be there for a while the parents nourish them, give them love, but not their personalities, not their wishes for the future. Even Shakespeare's sonnets, and what are called the procreation sonnets of Shakespeare, his first 10 or 12 sonnets, talk about a man wanting a child to be exactly like himself, his copy, so that he can continue. And this goes across ages. It goes across all families almost. I mean, children should be there, as far as the parents look upon their children, as beings entrusted to them until they mature, that they can be more and more on their own. So that at the age of 18, for instance, they should be able to choose their own names without the parents feeling hurt that their new choice could be considered a rejection of the name that the parent, or choose their own religion. If they want to choose a religion, what right do we have to give a religion to our children? The culture, yes, of course the culture, but not the faith. So our freedom, I think you stressed this point as well, Evrim, in your writings, that from birth on, we're almost slaves. were enslaved. And the first enslavement is in the family. I'm not saying that there should be no family, because there have been many experiments with the Nazis, Soviet Union, kibbutzes in Israel, etc., various dystopias. No family, of course, does not work. It's not natural. But the ethics of the family, the ethos of the family needs to be different. I mean, we need to be educated how to be parents as well, in terms of ethics, morality, not just in terms of how to breastfeed a child.
All right. And also I'm going to remember your words, your works and books. You almost became a poet rather than a writer in late years. Why did you choose to use that kind of tool in communication? Because the poems are much more imaginative and open texts rather than the academical ones or the long ones, etc.
Thank you. First of all, I'm humbled that you've looked at things and you've noticed changes in what I've written. That's very, because I know how busy you are. I mean, you reach out to the world in terms of art and creativity. So I'm really humbled. Thank you, Evrim. I don't know how I agree with you as to how you define poems or poetry, but it happened on its own, because in a way, in a poet, you say a great deal more with less words. And therefore it takes, so you have to be very, very careful with the words. And so it takes, I mean, I think I wrote a poem the other day. I was very happy with it. I sent it to a friend. I said, do you think I should have it published? He wrote an email back to me saying, yeah, it's a very good poem. I'll send it to this magazine, whatever. Is this, do you want to check the punctuation again? He said, just the commas and the periods. So I started looking at the punctuation. I changed the comma, then I changed the word, then I changed the stanza. I got rid of some words. It's an evolving poem still. With that, in prose, you change a lot less, because you can keep on explaining and re-explaining yourself. And it's also fun, the voyage is fun, looking for that specific word, that one word, and whether it should be accompanied by a comma or a period. The full stop is sometimes you're wading through the jungle, and sometimes you're attentive to all the sounds in the jungle, and it's difficult to describe, but you say less, with less words, you say more. At least that's what I think a poem does.
And it is also a very plastic and powerful tool, very, very imaginative tool, again, that reminds me the Far Eastern culture of visual arts and music, and of course, inescapably, haikus.
Haikus especially, I remember when you mentioned the Far East, of course, I mean, Western specialization, unfortunately, came with the West. I mean, you see it in China for ages, no matter what the kingdom was, the creator, the artist, does the painting, does the calligraphy that goes on to the painting, and puts the poem that he's written. He does his poetry. He does his calligraphy, which is an art in its own. He does the painting. I mean, that's life, all rolled into one. And unfortunately, arts have become way too compartmentalized, as social sciences have. I mean, what else? Sociology, psychology, social psychology. It's absurd, really. It's the typical elephant thing. You hold the elephant by the tail, by the ear, whatever, you can never see the element. We become the whole thing, we become so compartmentalized in the arts, in the sciences that we've really lost the track of things, the meaning of things, the essence of things. Poetry, I think, catches that essence.
But also poetry needs the acoustic experience in itself.
Yes, yes, and it's not a coincidence that we don't hear poetry anymore in this day and age. It's not a coincidence. It shows the misdirection of our spirit, that poetry is now only written and not heard.
And also your identity, I mean, your linguistic and literature identity reminds me of the Greek mythology.
Come again? Could you paraphrase?
Of course, of course. Also, your talent on literature reminds me of the heritage of Greek mythology.
My relationship to literature, you mean?
All right. You have a huge universe of creatures and phenomena which you are always cooking the ideas in themselves.
Perhaps I call them postcards from life. But even, I don't know why, associations are funny, but as we're talking about poetry, my mind went back to leaders again. And to my mind came this guy, it's a socialist, a US socialist, I think his name was Dubois, early 20th century. And he's addressing a group of workers. And he's the leader, right? He's even when he was alive, the mythological figure, so to speak. And he says, I can lead you to socialism, no problem. He believes in himself. I can lead you to socialism, but somebody else can take you out from that door and take you back just as quickly, just as easily. I mean, that's what leaders do. They lead us and we follow them, sometimes to the north, sometimes to the south, but with the belief in the leader, we lose our whole sense of orientation. That's why leaders...
So what is the... All right. So from your perspective, so what is the difference between being a leader and being an artist and being a prophet?
Mm-hmm. I don't know if the prophets ever called themselves a prophet. Their disciples called them the prophets.
Messenger.
So, but then, of course, the prophets accepted the veneration of their disciples, and they took themselves as prophets, which made them authoritarian figures. And eventually, after their death, their teaching became frozen in time and orthodox, like regulations to be applied across time, which is what has given religion intolerance, whereas it was meant to be based on tolerance. All religions eventually become intolerant because of this now faith in the defunct, the dead leader. And each generation that comes along tries to interpret that leader to their own ends, but because it's still fixed in stone, so to speak, carved in stone, those magical words, everyone blames each other for going astray from what the leader prophesies. And it's such a dangerous thing, leadership. Could I go on? I just thought of an example of what
Please.
At university, I became the president of the International Student Society, and all my friends started calling me Mr. President. First jokingly. I mean, people who would, you for instance, Evrim, would call me Gündüz one day, and after I become president, jokingly, you would say Mr. President. But after a while, I took myself seriously. I thought of myself indeed as the president of the other students. And then being president gave me a sense of power, of knowledge, of power. And it made me more appreciative of people who praised my presidency, and those who did not, I looked upon a bit with askance. I distanced myself from them, thinking that they were distancing themselves from me. Then eventually you begin to wonder what they really think of you. So you ask a close friend, do they like me? Don't they like me? Otherwise, in other words, you're using spies, you're using informers. And then you develop a paranoia as a leader because you know that somebody out there in your organization wants to be the next president. Maybe even before waiting for elections, he wants to overthrow you. And this is typical. What happened to me individually in that instance is typical of all leaders, all presidents, all politicians, all kings. That's why they have their spies. That's why they have paranoia. That's why they don't like criticism. I mean, unless we abolish this hierarchical sense of a society with leaders, same thing in the business place, in a company. Again, the company director, the CEO, etc., the more he distances himself as a know-it-all from all the people in the company working for him, the more he becomes paranoid as to whether they're really following his instructions, whether cheating on the company, whether they'll transfer to another company, etc., etc. We need a horizontal structure, not a vertical structure with leaders. And I think that's where society is going, because all the movements in Isaac's newspaper too, in Ceren's article, we saw examples, for instance, all the recent movements since the last 15, 20 years have been leaderless movements. Almost all. Hong Kong has some leaders, but Gezi in Turkey, all the youth movements in South America, Tahrir in Egypt, England, Spain, have all been leaderless movements. The singing revolution, Estonia, from the Russians, Estonia, Latvia, all without leaders. Revolutions without leaders. Their independence from Russia.
Yeah. Your words also remind me the topic of global warming, Gündüz, because once you said we are much more horizontal rather than vertical, the Earth also experiencing that change, sudden change. You know, all the ice bergs are melting, all the trees are gone, all the earthquakes are, you know, speedy now, or I don't know, too much, you know, problems on ecology. Everything became tragically horizontal, and things are very urgent, like the atmosphere, like the pollutions in everywhere, and also it experiences in the earth, on the surface of the earth, and in the atmosphere, it realizes a sudden change horizontally to mirroring the failure of civilization, the failure of all flags, all nations, all borders, you know, rather than social or political ones, because of the geographical ones, the real organic global ones.
It's the failure of civilization, but it's our failure, your failure and my failure.
Of course.
And almost all of us, probably everybody, I don't want to be unjust to anybody, but everyone listening to us. I mean, becoming globally, becoming planet conscious is rather new, of course. I mean, Rachel Carson wrote a book in the late 50s against DDT called The Silent Spring, where she referred to how we poisoned our planet with with things, with sprays on the, with chemical sprays on the planets, but it really only took for Corona to make us realize that we're global citizens, that something's happening on this planet that's affecting all of us. Although I consider Greta our planet's first citizen, first global citizen, all her cries, all the research, all the scientists, and all the suppression by companies like Exxon denying that, fossil fuel companies denying that there was global warming, climate change, etc. Even when all those lies became public by the companies, global warming still was not an issue for us. I mean, look at this country, Turkey. Have you heard the politicians speak about global warming, climate change? Not just Turkey, many countries. But now, finally, with Corona, we have a global consciousness. And hopefully...
Instead...
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Anyway,
instead of it, contrarily, we are trying to build our first nuclear plant.
In Turkey, yes. Anyway, hopefully this global consciousness will open new horizons for us, and hopefully it's not too late. Of course, nuclear energy, corruption, I mean, the nuclear in Japan, what was it called? The nuclear facility that exploded, Fukushima.
Fukushima, or yeah.
Fukushima, I think, about 10 years ago. It turned out that there was a committee to regulate this facility to make sure that everything was safe, right? The checklist. Did they do this? Did they do that, etc. It turned out that on the panel, the commission of regulators, half the regulators were owners of the nuclear plant. So whenever they didn't abide by security issues so that there would not be an explosion, they said, well, we'll do that next year, or we'll check that later. It's pure corruption in capitalism, that disaster, and we can't not have more disasters like this.
And unfortunately, there's a huge hypocrisy in Western countries, because almost every country has its own nuclear plants, etc.
Not Germany. Thank you, Germany.
I think we had a comment and question from Mrs. Eser Epezdemir previously, and you didn't heard it very correctly, Gündüz.
Okay. Yeah.
Can she repeat that question, because she has a very beautiful comment on East and West and Istanbul.
Actually, that was not my comment. That was something that I recall from Gündüz Vassaf's one of articles.
Okay.
If I'm not mistaken, you were mentioning that how it is almost nonsense to draw the line of East-West from somewhere from Istanbul. As it is accepted the line that's separating it into two, the world into two.
Yeah, we can split the world into many parts, or we can look at it globally, or we can do both. But if we get fixated on one, then we lose a great deal. We lose perspective. Even when we look at things globally and we can't think of the particulars involved, we lose perspective. Just looking at things globally does not mean that we have perspective. I mean, it's trite, everybody says this, but they have to mesh together.
Also, if I'm not mistaken, in the same article, you were highlighting that how it is actually not helping to all of us to divide the world map with the lines, but it is separating us to be from global citizens than citizens of X, Y, and Z countries. And also, as you mentioned a couple of minutes ago, how COVID made us to feel that we are all in the same ship.
Quite. And I really am, language is very important. And I mean, Germany, after World War II, after the experience with Hitler and National Socialism, Nazism, when a German commentator now in a football match, let's say that Germany is playing England, the national football teams are playing each other. The German commentator, referring to the German team, never says our team, unsere Mannschaft. He says the German team. And the more we affix ourselves to our nationality, saying my country or my government, the more we become, the more we put ourselves in a one-dimensional sense of being, I think. It's, if you want to talk about Turkey, say Turkey. If you want to talk about the US, say the US. But let it not be, at least that's my personal opinion, an us and them situation. Because we're all here together on the planet.
Totally agree, and it is the maybe the most effective way of making people polarized in terms of nationality, in terms of skin color. It's all the same. Thank you,
Esther. Exactly. I mean, I try to. I'm certainly not successful because I'm not always conscious of it. But whenever I use the word we, I try to use it for all life on the planet. I mean, it's difficult to include the plants and the rabbits and the squirrels, but certainly all the human beings. When I say we, I mean all of us. It's funny that when we're talking about people on the planet, very few people say we, as if he or she is not a human being. They say people. People are like this. People are like that. No, not people. I am like that, or we are like that. Somehow we're able to abstract ourselves from everybody else as if they live on another planet, and they say people are like that. I mean, we are like that, if anything.
So after these beautiful comments by Mrs. Epezdemir and Gündüz, I remind you the paradigm or the lessons of French philosopher Michel Foucault. As you remember, I hope he warns us against the tools of the state, like hospitals, like schools, you know, so like prisons, like military facilities. My question to Gündüz, which is, do we need a real revolutionary, potentially fulfilled and trustable tool to change this world, like social media or a new language or a new term or definition on democracy, an alternative democracy idea, etc.?
I think, even first of all, I think we need to have faith in ourselves that the world is changing and it can be changed. And it's not too difficult to have the faith. We just look at the past and see how things have evolved in terms of women's rights, for instance, children's rights, still workers' rights, longevity of life. I mean, it is absolutely a better life. And often we're too impatient with change, especially because we're so much used to instant change, instant coffee, instant this, instant sex, that we become impatient with our day. And it's good to be impatient because that gives us energy, that gives us motivation, but it also could make us feel depressed if nothing happens overnight. If you go and demonstrate 2 or 3 times and then you get beaten up by the police and you give up, well, it's our immaturity. And maybe you shouldn't be demonstrating anyway. You should be looking at the signs of evolution rather than striking out at your first consciousness of injustice and saying, I must do something. Often it's more conscience cleansing than world changing. But if we can put things in perspective, in a historical perspective, there is a great deal that is being done, that can be done, as long as we see the evolution of society, of human rights. And that's not too difficult. And one of our pitfalls, I think, is complaining. Because if you just complain, it's good, it's calling attention to something. But then if the complaint is not followed up by what can I do or what can we do, just the complaint in and of itself is against evolution, is against revolution, is against change, because just the complaint makes you feel bad. It makes you think that, well, things have always been bad, they'll never change. It's depressive. So one of our biggest enemy, I think, in terms of change is complaints that are not followed up by what can I do? What can we do?
And also terminating is very simple and quick rather than creating something.
Exactly, 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 exactly.
Which creates all fundamental thoughts or actions around the globe in the name of religion, in the name of flags, in the name of nations or leaders or myths.
Yeah. And we shouldn't use the word,
After
I think. Go ahead.
Please, please. We should,
no, just one sentence. We shouldn't use the word hope also too loosely. Because at the end one says, well, there's always hope, we hope. But if you use the word hope without believing in it, you just say hope, inshallah, whatever the word. Hope has to have fingers, it has to have claws. You have to know what you're hoping for. Again, accompanied by what can I do? But if you just say, well, let's hope things get better, that's a failure. That's a cop-out.
Evrim, sorry to interrupt, but we have come to end of our time. Maybe we can have some questions or comments.
If there's any, please join us.
Is there any questions or comments?
Could I ask some questions?
Hi, Isaac, of course.
Hi, Gündüz and Evrim. Thank you very much.
There you are. Hello, Isaac. Good to see you.
Good to see you. And thank you very much for the talk and lots of amazing thoughts. There are lots of things in my mind, but one thing that I remember, Gündüz, you said, what is freedom and how can we define freedom right now? And like you also talk a bit about the pandemic. And I was just thinking about this, how freedom has been switching, how people are using freedom in so many contexts, in the name of freedom to do this and that. In the name of freedom, we don't wear a mask. In the name of freedom, we kill. Or in the name of freedom, we colonize something. So we see this like switching of freedom that is patriotic and that is also always like coming from like what you also mentioned later, my freedom. Like the idea of mine, like instead of our freedom, or like saying our freedom, then what are the other freedom? So like I won't say I have a very concrete questions about the switching of freedom, but my like what I'm thinking is like, how can we deal with this? Like when freedom has been constantly being changed. At the same, I also know that in your work you write a lot about freedoms. That's why I'm interested to know when we are talking about freedom and how we deal with this switching. Does it like, as Evrim also said, is it the need to create a new word or a new thing to explain different kinds of freedom? Or like, how would it be possible to deal with all this, all the time saying the same word, but it always means different things?
No, I really more than admire your sense of the importance of words, the words that we use, which define things. And the more we use certain words, the less we understand them, or the more meanings they take, so that they really lose their essence. And I mean, your example with the masks also, another thing is equality, that I think Plato would like this, not that I appreciate Plato, but in our ignorance, we feel that we can be as equal as the scientists, for instance, when it comes to corona. Because we know that we're not scientists, we don't want to wear masks, but that's my right. My ignorance of science, I consider also as my right, because I'm equal to the scientist as a member of the society. But I know it's not an answer to your question, but I think we have to use these words less and less. Freedom too, I think, is a word that has to be used less. Peace has to be used less. Equality has to be used less, because or democracy has to be used less. I mean, look, there are about 200 countries in the world, almost all of them in their official names and their UN definitions have the word democracy in them. And 2/3 of them are totalitarian countries. So the less we use these words, I think the better it is. The more we can define what we think democracy is with other words, it can be a sharing, come teaching, participating experience. Because you say democracy, Isaac, I say democracy, then we think we agree. But of course we don't. I mean, you and I might agree, but not really. Because we haven't really defined what we mean by democracy. Are we talking about Greek democracy, Korean democracy, whatever? So I think my only sort of stab at an answer to your question is to use these words less and less, but define what we mean by them, by example, by anecdote, more and more.
Thank you very much.
So Gündüz, can you hear?
Yes.
And after all these words based on the freedom and the need of definition, can we say the same things also for the love itself?
Yeah, never say I love you. Or never love me like I love you. It's too possessive.
Because almost
it's
any
too possessive. It's too
yeah,
possessive.
it can be a very
I mean, I say I love you to you, then I want to hear the same thing back from you. Then it becomes sort of an exchange, a market exchange. If you don't say it, then I say, what the hell is the matter? I mean, bad words to use.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Gündüz, Isaac, and all participants for
Evrim, I can say this about, I can say this. I mean, before there was language, I'm sure people loved each other in their own way. let's not rely so much on language to express our thoughts and emotions. There are different ways of expressing them, art being one of them. But we rely on language way too much to express ourselves, way too much. And as a result, we've lost other dimensions of ourselves. Sorry, that's all.
No, thank you. Thank you again also for these kind words and comments. And I would like to finish our event because of the limit of time. Thank you to Tarabya Kültür Akademisi, Zilberman'ın Gallery, and Bilsart to realize this unique project by Isaac Chong Wai today and since almost 1.5 months. And thank you for all the mind and physical workers, laborers, our friends to realize, help to the realizing these perfect, almost unique project. And I would like to end our conversation with a example from the history of religion with your comments, Mr. Vassaf. I hope you can give back and give a feedback. Our conversation reminds me the example of the prophet, the Noah, which he tries to design and build a huge ship with all creatures. Prophet Noah.
Yeah.
And we are almost in the same moment now. And I just imagine that, did Prophet Noah also take some creatures from the sea on that ship?
Brilliant. I mean, I think the answer to that is the fish never realizes that he's swimming in the sea. And obviously, I don't think Noah realized, he thought that he was only living on land, perhaps, took animals that were useful to him, especially.
So,
yeah.
So because of your age and memories, perhaps we are still living in a yellow submarine.
That's a good song. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Gündüz. Thank you for all efforts.
Thank you, and thank you all for listening. Thank you.
Bye-bye.